Dear video professional, the elements of this videotape represent the work of creative professionals like yourself. Unauthorized duplication of this tape not only is a federal crime, but also contributes to the destruction of an industry that you helped create. Please do your part by not duplicating this videotape. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lee Stranahan, and welcome to Lightwave Flying Logos. In this tape, we're going to be covering a lot of techniques that can really add interest to your flying logos, and we're also going to be showing you how to create objects using Pixel 3D later on in the tape. Now, we have a lot of techniques in this tape and a lot of material to cover, so let's get started right away. Alright, this animation we're going to play a few times, and what you'll see here is the word sail, as it flies back, is fading off into infinity. We're going to talk about that, but the first thing we want to cover is the background, the gigantic letters, the LICO 1 day background there. All right, now this background was created using a combination of toaster paint and of Lightwave. We used toaster paint to create the grid background itself, and you can see that on your screen right now if we take a look at the graphic. And then the words LICO 1 day were all created with Lightwave. We just position those. So let's start with the toaster paint part of this background. And we're entering toaster paint here, and the first part of it was pretty easy. All we wanted to do is create a blue to purple spread. So I'll click, here is our range color. There's our blue, and on the other side we'll just choose purple. And this section isn't intended really to be a full tutorial on toaster paint. If you're not familiar with toaster paint, you might want to look at one of our other tapes, Plug. Let's go to our transparency slider, and we'll just move this up into the upper left-hand corner. And now I'm going to hit W for whole screen. And by hitting W, what that's going to do is it's going to fill from the blue up in this corner, because that's where we put the hotspot, the transparency hotspot, to purple down in this color. This will create a nice sort of gradient spread. And let's just render that up to the program monitor so you can see how that looks. Okay, there we are so far. All right, the next thing that we want to do is put the sort of embossed stripes in the background, and we just use the light and darken functions of that. Now, in order to draw these stripes evenly, I'm going to set up a grid first. So we'll just go, and by holding down the right mouse button, I get these menus. I go to Prefs, and let's pull down Set Grid. Now, the next time I hold down the left mouse button, I'm going to be setting the grid, and you can see the different sizes as I move the mouse around. This shows us how big the grid will be, and I'll set it fairly large. And now what I'm going to want to do is go to Lighten mode. And I will make sure I have the unfilled rectangle chosen. And you also notice I picked a square brush here. Make it a little bit larger. And now just draw a rectangle. You'll see I can only draw between these 2 points now because it's snapping to that grid. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip this first grid point and move to the second one. Pull it right across screen. And just render that out so you can see how that looks so far. And again, do another sort of skip here. And you'll see why I'm skipping these in just 1 second. So here's our lightens. Now just go to darken mode. And sort of those are the even lines, now I'll fill in the odd ones. And again, they're not going to be nice and even because the grid won't let me do anything else. So there we go. And let's render that up. Okay, so there's sort of our embossed stripes in the background there. And one other thing I did to give sort of a lighting effect was I used lighten and darken on the whole screen. And the way I did that was, first I'll stay in darken mode. Let me just turn off the grid. And then I went to the transparency control section And I'll move the spot up here to the upper left. And I just want to make sure that this bar is all the way down. This is our edge slider. So now it's going to fade in from very dark in this corner, and it's going to fade out to less dark in the rest of the frame. And then once again I hit W. And again, you'll see as it draws here, it's going to start off dark and sort of gradually decrease the darkening until there's almost no darken effect at all in the lower corner. And I'm going to do that twice. I'm going to hit W again. And again, any of these techniques, I could move the hotspot, I could do anything I want to. And I could, for instance, take a piece of concrete, run the first color spread that we did over that. I could do the bars horizontally or vertically, whatever I want to do. So you've got a lot of options here. This is just to give you some ideas. And let me render out with the two darkens up in the corner here. Now the image looks like this. And then the other thing I did was I just go to lighten mode and move it up to the upper right-hand corner. And again, W. And now it's going to start lightening up here, and it's going to sort of gradually fade out the lighten on the rest. And again, I could position that hotspot down in the corner here, and that would make it lighter on the bottom. I think that's what I did on the actual graphic that I used. But you get the idea here. Okay, now that we're done with this part of the graphic, let's save this to a location that Lightwave can find it easily. And so I'm going to pull down from the picture menu, Save RGB. And let me just call this blue background, whatever. Click on Save RGB. And the reason I'm using Save RGB here is because this loads it into the exact drawer that Lightwave looks for its images in. You'll see when we go into Lightwave, it'll make it very, very easy to suddenly find this image. So we're done in here. Let's just exit out of Toaster Paint and head right into Lightwave. Now, first thing we're going to do is let's do a load image. So we go to the Images menu, Load Image, and you'll see there it is right there, blue background. Save RGB from Toaster Paint always saves things into the Images drawer that Lightwave uses. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this blue background image, go to the Backdrop menu, and select it as our background image. So here's what we have so far, and let's just do a quick sort of low-res render. Going to low-res in the camera menu, click on Render, and OK. You see as it renders out here, there's just the image in the background. Okay, so far so good. Now what we did was we created 3 text objects, and again, you've got some options for creating your text. We'll show you one of them using Pixel 3D at the end of this tape. But let's just load up those 3 objects. And I've organized all my things into drawers here. This just makes things a lot easier to find. And I have the words day, Lico. I'm going to hit load object one more time. You'll notice that it just pops up the requester again, and 1. Okay, and now let's enter layout. Now you'll notice one thing is the letters have all loaded themselves into the exact right position. We move to camera view here. And this is no accident. I set them to load into this position when I was in Modeler. And it was pretty easy to do by just setting the pivot point in Modeler so that I lined up these 3 objects in different layers. So actually you'll see when I select any of these objects, let me select Object, and I'll select Lico first. When I rotate it, you notice it's rotating around this center position. It's because it's not really centered properly. It's not really centered around the middle of the object, but it makes it very, very convenient here. And this is just something that I set up in Modeler. If I'm not happy with the positions, like you'll notice the 1 and the day aren't exactly in the same line. It's just pretty easy work for me to take the 1 and move it down a little bit. Go to Move and just holding down the right mouse button. Drag it down so it's in the same line. Of course, once I'm happy with an object's position, I always keyframe it to keep it in that position. And keyframing, I always use the keyboard equivalent. I hit the return key once to bring up the requester, and again, which is the equivalent of clicking on OK, I hit the return key. Or I hit the return key. You hit it twice in a row, there's your keyframe. Okay, now let's just exit layout and do a quick render of this. And you see, one advantage of this is we can get very, very big text objects by creating them in Modeler and moving them around. This is just a simple layout of them. You notice I've also assigned surfaces, and if we go to the surfaces requester, these are just dirt simple surfaces. These are all just colors. There's nothing fancy about them whatsoever. 100% diffuse and just different shades of color on them. That's all. So once I was happy with this as my background, I would just go to high resolution, click on render, and render this out. And now, because it's going to be in high resolution, the text is going to look a lot better, and you'll see that as it renders down. Okay, I can tell looking from seeing the render that this is going to look fine. And I'm going to save this entire thing, the words Lico and One Day with the background, as a separate image. And the reason I'm going to do that's pretty simple. It's going to save us render time. You see, right now it's going to have to render the letters. And I could just take the word sail and fly it back into this scene, for instance, and there'd be no problem with that. There'd be no difference in the way you'd see it on screen. But there's one big problem with that is the render times are going to be a lot higher. The words Lico and One Day are not moving at all in this animation. They're just staying right there. And so the only thing that's really moving is the word sail. By saving this as one image, we can then load up that image, and just the way we used the blue background we created in Toaster Paint as a background image for this scene, we can now use the whole Lico One Day image as a background image for the sail scene, and it's going to speed our render times up pretty significantly. It's going to save us probably close to a minute a frame and on this 040 machine, and a lot more if we're using an unaccelerated machine or an 030 accelerator. So to save this as an image, we go to Record and just Save Images, and then I just give this any name I want, like Lico, and then when I click on Render, it's going to save this as Lico 001 or 000, whatever the first frame under Scenes is. In this case, it's 001. All right? So we just click on Render, and that's saved. Okay. Now that this is saved, let's clear the whole scene out and start from scratch again. We're going to go Load Image, and now we're going to go Load Lico 001. And just render this as a backdrop image. So we tell it in backdrop, background image, Lico 001. And now let's load up the word sail and head back into layout. Well, before I even do that, let me just go to camera here and do a quick low-res render. And you'll see as we look at it render here, it's only rendering the word sail. The background just comes up automatically. Now you're going to see we use these background images a lot over the course of the tape, and the reason, again, is they cut down render times and they make your backgrounds a lot more interesting than just black or even just color gradient. And in fact, you'll find that a background image renders quicker than a color gradient. So you can see it's worth it to spend the 2-3 minutes we spend in Toaster Paint to get a more interesting background there. So again, if the choice is between more work doing something the tricky way and doing it the easy way, always do it the easy way, but this is pretty easy and it gives you much better looking logos. So now let's play around and get the word sail animating. And first thing we're going to do is let's set up our last frame as 90. We'll do a 3-second flyback. And let's head right into layout. And you can see we've only got the one object there. Go to camera view. Object is our edit item and the word sail. Now I know I want it to start back, so I'm just going to turn off everything but Z, move it back on the Z axis, and then kind of rotate it like this. And this is where I'm going to want it to end. So actually, let me follow my good habits here and just go to frame 90 first, move it where I want it, and then create a keyframe. Again, I just hit the return key twice. So there it is at frame 90. Now, at frame 0, I want it sort of behind the camera, and I want it kind of rotated another direction. Let me go to our front view here so I can see it's rotated another way. And make sure we can't see it. That's fine. Let me just go there first. Bring it back. Create a key. Okay. And let's just take a look at how this looks. I'm going to make a wireframe preview. Okay, you're going to see problem number 1 here is that the word sail never actually goes straight. Just kind of shooting from the hip there. You can read it kind of, but what I really want to happen in this animation is at one point I want the word sail to be, straight up, so it's very, very easy to read just right there. It's not always 3D. So here's a quick way to do that, and this is a trick that's so dumb it's criminal. But let's go to frame 90. You'll notice at frame 90, if we check out rotate, the direction is negative 39.6, positive 48.6, and then on bank it's 0. Well, if at frame 0 we make it positive 39.6 and negative 48.6, so we'll go back to frame 0, use the previous key button to do that, and then make it positive 39.6, negative 48.6, create key. Let me just make sure those are the right numbers. Yep, that's it. I'm just switching between the keyframes here. Okay? Well, if I go to frame 45, because it's a 90 frame animation, hey, look. You see, the negative sort of cancels itself out. So right in the middle there, it's straight up. Again, so dumb, it's criminal, but it works here. And it's going to get us a nice, smooth sort of motion path that right in the middle gives us a very clear view of the logo. Now, the other problem I have with this so far is I could see that on the first 10 frames there, it takes about 10 frames for it to actually enter the picture. So I just have to move it a little bit closer to the camera. Right now it's apparently too far back, and then it will look a little bit better. So let me just go to the side view here and go to frame 0. And let's do a center so we can see our logo. See, I can see it's way too far back from the camera. Move it closer. I just want to make sure from camera view we don't see any of it peeking out. I'm watching this corner down here. I want it just sort of peeking in. That's good. Create keyframe. And let's just do that again. And again, you're going to see at frame 45, it's still going to be straight out. Now, another thing we can do here, and I did this in the final version before, is I did a similar sort of trick that I did with the rotates. I don't like the way it's just coming out sort of straight from behind the camera. You can see when I play the first few frames of this preview, it just kind of starts from there. So what I did was, just end playback. What I did was at frame 0, I moved it in the Y direction. And let me just go to our side view again. Okay, I can see from here, well, I'll give it about 0.5 so it'll be exact. So I'll enter it numerically. 0.5 in the Y direction. Create key. Then at frame 90, negative 0.5. Create key. And again, same thing. It's just going to move smoothly from the top through that point. Now, there's one other thing I'm going to do with this. I'm going to adjust these spline controls. And again, if you remember from our other tapes, we talked about spline controls extensively. I use a tension of 1 to sort of slow things down to park. And often, to get a good-looking motion path, I'll put a tension of 1 on the first keyframe, tension of 1 on the last keyframe. Good principle here. Like with this motion, you want as few keyframes as possible. It's one of the biggest problems I see with people's reels is a lot of times they have sort of jerky, weird motions, and usually it's a result of too many keyframes. So let's just set spline 1 at frame 90, and then frame 0, spline of 1. And again, that means it's going to start out slowly, pick up some speed in the middle, and then slow down as it nears its sort of final point there. So let's take a look at what we've done so far. Here's the wireframe preview. And that looks pretty good. And again, you'll notice we're not moving it way out into the distance. A lot of people that try to make this disappear, their tendency would be, well, let's put the sail, about 1,000,000 miles away. But that's not going to give you a smooth path, and also, Even a million miles away, you'll see this little dot on the screen. So what we're going to use is we're going to use Lightwave's dissolve function. So let's show you how we'd set that up. So let's exit layout and go to objects. And under current object, we'll just make sure we have sail chosen. And what we're going to set up here is the object dissolve, and we're going to use an envelope. If we were to set 100% here, for instance, it starts out at 0, and that means the object's fully visible. It's not dissolved at all. If we set it to 100% dissolved, that means that the object is now fully invisible. And if we go back into layout, you'll see, let me just go to frame 90. See, it doesn't even show up. If we move through the frames, it shows up as this little sort of outline, but it's 100% dissolved, so we can't see it. Now, a 100% dissolved object has some actual uses, and we'll come to those later in the tape. But for our purposes here, it wouldn't be a particularly effective animation. So let's exit back out. And what we're going to do instead is set up an envelope. Put this back to 0. And an envelope, remember, is just a way of animating values. And the value that we're going to animate here is the dissolve value. We're going to start it off normal at 0%, and then at some point we're going to fade it out so it sort of dissolves into the distance. And I would start that here around frame maybe 75. So for the first 75 frames, it's fully set. Then at frame 75, it starts to dissolve out till it's invisible at frame 90. And so that means we have keyframes at 0, because there's always a keyframe at frame 0. Then we'll create a keyframe at 75, and create a keyframe at 90. Okay, and let's move through our current keyframes. Take them one at a time. Okay, at frame 0, we want it dissolved, not a bit. Fully visible. So far, so good. Frame 75, we want it dissolved, still 0, not a bit. And this way, what it's going to do is it's going to stay normal from 0 to 75. But then at frame 90, we want it 100% dissolved. And you'll see it sort of shows us visually the way this will look. And you'll notice one interesting thing happened when we set this keyframe at 90, is that this part of the path here got all curvy. And that's because Lightwave uses splines, which is just a 50-cent word for curve, when it creates its paths. It moves along curved paths. And this would create a real problem here, because you can see from 0 to 75, at this point it's sort of like a negative dissolve amount. It would do something weird. So the way we turn this off is we just go to frame 75, and we're going to turn off the curve from this keyframe to this one. And the way we do that is with the linear button. Watch what happens when I click on this. It's now a linear, a straight line path between the current keyframe, 75 right here, and the previous keyframe. One important thing to note here, by the way, is that we had to have that keyframe at 75. Otherwise, if we just had a frame at 0, where it's 0% dissolved, and 90, where it's 100% dissolved, it would start dissolving immediately. So throughout the entire animation, it would kind of slowly dissolve. We don't want that. First 75, normal, then at 75, starts to slowly fade out. So that's why we did it the way we did. Let's just go to Use Envelope. And if we enter back layout here and make a preview, one thing you'll notice is that it's not going to show us the dissolve because we're just in wireframe. We're actually going to have to render a few frames just to make sure everything looks good if we want to see this. And by the way, this is very good practice in general for a reason that you're about to see here. We're going to set up surfaces next on this animation, and you're going to see if we don't render a few frames in the middle, we can develop some problems that might not occur to us. So let's just show you how this looks. Looks pretty much exactly the same way it did before. Again, you see it doesn't show us the dissolve or anything. We have to see that through a rendering. Let's end playback and exit layout. Okay. Let's go and render a scene. Let's render frame 45, the one right in the middle. We'll just make that our first frame to render. Click on render. And again, there's one where it's straight up. And not exactly the beauty of 3D graphics. One of the big problems here, surfaces. So let's alter the surfaces. And we're just going to do something very simple here. As we showed you In the surfaces tape, we're going to use a piece of tin foil, and we're going to make that, this is the default surface, that's the word sail. We're going to make that a 100% reflection map. So we set 100%, make the reflected image not Lico, but tinfoil. And let's just set our color here to sort of a light blue. A little bit of green in it. And turn on color highlights. This way, again, the reflection map will take on that surface. And let's see how this looks. Okay, that looks okay there. Let's take a look at another frame. Let's just render out, let's say, frame, 15. And I'm going to hit F10 here to render. You can see at frame 15 here, the text is just coming into frame. But as we look at the rendered version, you'll notice one problem, and it's up with the S. You can see how we can see the individual facets of the S. That's a bad thing. So, go to Surfaces, and remember we turn on Smoothing. And let's hit F10 to render. And you'll see that this will get rid of the faceting along the edge of the S, but it creates all kinds of fun new problems for us. And take a look at this when it renders, you'll see. Boy, it got weird, especially along the A there. You can see it, the surface just changed completely, and it doesn't really look a lot better. So what's the problem here? The problem is that the front faces, this is a beveled, you can see that the sides of the text are beveled here. The front faces are just flat, but they're being smoothed into the side beveled faces. And so it's causing rendering problems with this reflection map. And this is something that I've seen before, and if we just render a frame a little ways in, if we render frame 30, you're going to see exactly the same problem here. This is a problem that you will come up against. And this is one of the reasons it's always good to render a few frames out. Now, this is a problem that's pretty easily solvable. All we're going to do is we're going to make the front faces, the flat faces, a flat surface that we don't have to turn on smoothing for, and then just the bevel we'll give smoothing to. And again, you can see the problem here, especially at the top of the A, completely messes up the reflection map. So, here's how we'd fix that. First, we'll enter modeler. And let's do a load, and we'll load up the word sail. Now, let's make this front window here a little bit bigger, and I'm going to zoom in by using the period keys. And what I want to do is I want to select just these front faces. So it's going to be a little tight to draw around them. I'm going to have to move in, select polygon, and I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and use the lasso. Click here, release there. And you see how that just selects the front faces? Because when I start here and end on this side, it draws a straight line to finish the lasso. Hit the right arrow to move over to the right a little bit. And remember in Modeler, to select more, we have to hold down the Shift key. So I'm holding down Shift and lassoing again. Those are selected now. And same thing here. Okay, now that we've selected those polygons, we just have to create a surface name and then assign the surface to those polygons. So let's start by creating the surface name. From the Options menu, we click on Edit Surface, and we'll do one called Flat. And then we'll do one called Smooth. Planning ahead here. And OK. Now with these selected, we just go back to Polygon, Surface, and Flat. These are now all named Flat. And with Polygon selected, I'm going to hit the W key. And this will just bring up Statistics. We'll choose all polygons, hit Statistics again, and then we will just deselect. See, here's Flat. There are 6 with the name Flat, so we will just deselect those. And now we will name all of these Smooth. All right. Now let's go up and save this object as sail. And then let's exit back out. This is a pretty good trick in Toaster 2.0 for replacing an object in a scene. What we've done is we've renamed the surfaces. And all we're going to do now is save the scene that we've created here as sail, for instance. And then we're going to reload in the scene. And because the object has the exact same name as it had before, it's going to reload up the object. Okay? And since the object has new surfaces, when we go to surfaces now you'll see there's smooth, there's flat. So let's just reassign these surfaces. And flat is easy. We'll set it up with the tinfoil image again. And this is just a wrinkled piece of tinfoil. 100% reflection map. Kind of light blue. Just the way we did before. But we're not going to turn on smoothing here. This is very, very important. Just remember to put on color highlights. Now that we've created the one surface, let's assign this same surface to smooth. And the quick way to do that is to quickly save this and then reload it. So we're going to do a save surface here. We'll save this as sail metal. Then we'll just go to smooth. That's our current surface. Load surface. And sail metal. That keeps us from having to re-enter those same things again. And now we'll just turn on smoothing. And let's click on render just to see this frame the way it looks now. Okay, and what you're going to see here when it renders down screen is how the front face is really, it makes a big, big difference there. Now it looks good as opposed to bad as it did before. Now there's one other thing that we might want to do here, and this is something I actually did do on this project. And let's just back up a little bit. Let's go into layout. And I want to kind of see the sides. Here's frame 18. Let's take a look at how frame 18 looks. F10 to render. And I just want to see how the edges look. I sometimes don't like the way reflection maps look right along the edges as things fly in, so I might do something to change it a little bit here, and I'll show you what I in fact did on the animation. Now, if you take a look at the bottom of the S, see how the reflection just looks a little weird there? Just don't much like the way that looks. So on the smooth surface, what we're going to do is I'm going to drop my diffusion down to about 30, give it a fairly high specularity, low glossiness, and you'll remember from the surfaces tape this is a good way to do metal, and then sort of about a, I don't know, 15% reflection. So just a little bit of reflection, but this sort of metallic look. And let's just re-render that. It's just going to give the sides, again, just a different surface look here. And one that I think will be just a little better for the sides. And let's watch as this renders now. There we go. So again, that might be a little dark. You can play with it, change it however you want to, but it gives you an idea. And again, this is very, very common. A lot of times you'll see different surfaces on the front and side faces of a logo. Very, very standard technique. Let's take one last look at the final animation that we showed you at the beginning. Again, this is not what we just created. I created this before. And again, one word of caution is I went through and created this in a fairly straightforward way, as you saw it here. But the actual one that I put together, I made a number of mistakes. But of course, on a tape like this, you don't really want to see mistakes. So we took you through it in a nice, orderly fashion. Now, the next project that we're going to show you, let's take a look at that right now. And this, again, is using dissolves. It might not look like it's using dissolves. Sort of the flipping down, changing words trick here. And let's take a look at how we did this. This was, again, pretty easy. And it's just setting up different dissolve envelopes. All right. We'll clear out our scene from scratch. And let's load up the 4 objects that we used. The All-Star, Blast, just hit this twice, Comedy, and Summer, and head into Layout. Okay, there they're all there in the middle of the screen in one jumbled mess. We'll go to Camera View. Okay, here's the first thing that we want to do. Let's select the object, and the first word is All-Star. It's going to be All-Star Summer Comedy Blast. So what we're going to do is we're going to select Summer, and then we're going to parent Summer to All-Star. So now whenever we move the All-Star, you'll see that Summer follows right along with it. Okay? Let's also parent Blast to All-Star and Comedy to All-Star. And now, basically, what's going to happen is whenever we move All-Star, the whole thing moves. So these words are all sort of tied together. Now, there's one thing that I'm going to do to make this look nice. You'll see that they're different sizes. In fact, you can see the bounding boxes there. You can see right there how they're different sizes. And one thing that I did to make this project look a little bit better was I stretched things so they were all the same size as the word All-Star. So I'll start with Blast. I'll go to Stretch. And then we'll just resize it right to there, because that's how big All-Star is. I'll take Comedy, make it a little smaller. Actually, the Comedy, you can see it's the descender on the Y that's making it stretch wrong. So on this one, I might actually make it a little bit bigger and drop it down some. I'm just trying to make these all roughly the same size. And Summer, see how this is stretching out? I can just make it, whoops. We still have Move selected. Let's just select Stretch. There we go. And now the important thing to do here, of course, is to keyframe all of these in position. So Summer, keyframe. Blast, keyframe. Comedy, keyframe. Otherwise, we're going to lose the stretch settings that we just set. So these are all roughly the same size now. And let's start with a real simple motion here. All we're going to do is what we did in the animation was we started at the top of the screen and just tumbled it down. So we will select All-Star, move it up in the Y direction, keyframe it there at 0. Let's go to frame 90. And at frame 90, we'll want it down here. And we will have wanted it to rotate around pitch. And I guess the first flip will go from All-Star, Summer, Comedy, Blast. So we're going to want about 540 degrees of rotation. And just because I want it to flip, every time it flips 180 degrees, I want to see a new word. So it's a total of 2 flips, 3 flips total, actually, 540 degrees. Enter that numerically. And keyframe at 90. And let's just exit layout. I want to make sure I have last frame set to 90 before I make our preview here. And let's make the preview. Here's what we have so far. A mess falling slowly down the screen. But this is important to check out, and it's important that we set up this motion first. Now here's the whole idea behind this. What we're going to do is, at each point where the letters are directly facing the camera, there's going to be a point, because these objects are all flat text, where they're facing the camera and you can only see sort of the side of it. At that point, we're going to dissolve from one object to the other. That's all this trick is. So it's just setting up different dissolve envelopes. So this, so far, looks like this. So far, so good. And now let's just go through the frames, and we can see, let's start it here. Okay, frame 13, it's directly facing the camera. And there's no way to, you have to actually go through and do this. There's no way to do this mathematically, really, because the perspective changes. So 13, 45, and 76. And I'm actually going to use some sort of acoustic equipment. Remember this? A pen, paper. So I'm just going to write down 13, 45, and 76. So I have something to refer to. I don't want to have to come back in and check this every time. So now this being done, let's exit out and set up our dissolves. And what we have to do is do it for one word at a time. We'll start with the word All-Star. Now we want the word all-star to be visible from frame 0 to 13. Then at 13 we don't want to see it anymore. Pretty straightforward. Dissolve, envelope, create a keyframe at 12 and at 13. And again, the reason we're creating one at 12 and at 13 is so we want it to be fully visible at 12, from frame 0 to 12, fully visible. At frame 13, no more. Okay, so frame 0, no dissolve. Frame 12, no dissolve. Frame 13, 100% dissolved. And again, this spline thing is going to mess us up, so we just set this frame here, frame 12, to linear. Done. Okay, next. Next word is summer. And we want summer to show up for the first time at frame 13. So we'll create a key for it at 13. Then at frame 45, we want it to vanish. So frame 44 and 45. And again, the idea here is from here, 0. In fact, I think we'll want to frame it 12 for this as well. Because from 0 to 12, we want it totally invisible. So 100% at 0, 100% at 12, totally vanished, and we will do linear to get rid of that. At frame 13, 0%. Frame 44, still 0%, and again, we have this curve. Let's get rid of it with the linear button. And then, frame 45, 100% dissolved. There we go. So far, so good. Now, just we keep doing this for every word. The next one will be comedy. And I'm sure you're getting the drill at this point. Object dissolve, envelope. This is frame 45, so we'll create it at 44, 45, and then we want it to vanish at 76, so we'll go 75, 76. Frame 0, 100% dissolve. We don't want to see the word comedy until we just need it, which is at 45. Frame 44, 100%. Linear. 45, 0, that's fine. 75, that's fine. Linear to get rid of it. And then 76, vanish again. And now finally, let's go to blast. Envelope. And remember, we have a 90 frame animation here, so we'll create a keyframe at 75, 76, and 90. Frame 0 through 75, 100% dissolved and visible. 76, it's visible through the end of the animation, frame 90. We'll just turn on linear there and use the envelope. Okay, lots of fun actual math, but again, this is a pretty good trick, and you can see we had to go through the whole process. It didn't take it that long, because the idea is if we do it in an orderly fashion, and that's one of the reasons for writing it down, we don't have to constantly go back in to check. You'll see when we go back into layout, the project here is pretty much done. All-star, summer, almost. Remember I said almost? Comedy. And you can see the only problem here is these are actually flipped upside down, the words summer and blast, but that's very, very easy to rectify. Let's just take a look at how that looks so far. So that's, perfect move there, very, very smooth. Now the only thing we have to do is the words summer and blast are in the wrong position. So at frame 0, because it really doesn't make any difference, we'll take the word summer and we will rotate it 180 degrees. That'll flip it upside down, create a keyframe for it. Now why can't you see the word summer here? Notice it's our selected item, because it's 100% dissolved. It's invisible to us unless we do something like start to move it around. Then you can see it a little bit. You can see the bounding box now. And again, just the same thing for blast. Give it a pitch of 180 and keyframe it. All right, and let's just quickly make that wireframe. And again, you're going to see There's the word summer. It's rotated 180 at 0, so it's rotated there throughout the scene. And when we get down to the word blast, same thing. Looks just perfect. All right, and that's, again, just another good, quick technique. Let's take a look at the final animation one more time. You'll see we just used a frame grab picture that we darkened a little bit in Toaster Paint behind the image, and everything else is what we set up for you there. It's just a number of dissolve envelopes. Now you can use dissolves for a number of things, and we'll be coming back to one other example later where we get a little funky with dissolves and start to use them in combination with some other things as well. But you see you have a lot of ideas. And let me just give you one other quick idea for something you could do with this is that you could have one flipping word, for instance, the way we set up, one word flips to another one, and get a whole bunch of those sort of falling in the background like streamers. You could have those side to side, so they're running from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen, one word flipping into another one. There's a lot of possibilities there, and again, it's just a matter of setting up dissolve envelopes that sort of wink the object right out as opposed to slowly dissolving it as we did in our first example. All right, let's take a look at another example, and now we're going to start to work with morphing a little bit. In this example, one thing that you'll see is the News 4 at the bottom starts off as italics, and then sort of as it moves in slowly to park, it turns into a non-italicized version of News 4. The other thing that you're going to see is the sort of spheres that are on the left side. They start off transparent at the bottom of the screen and then become more opaque as they rise up the screen. Let's also talk about the background. Let's start by talking about the background a little bit. That was pretty simple, and if you look on the program monitor here, what we have is the simple Toaster Paint background. What we started with is a grid going from blue to purple, and then I just drew a couple of bars, lighten and darken. That's all we're doing here with this graphic. If you've seen our paint tape, you know this sort of thing is very easy to create. Then the next thing that we did was we added a bridge element, again just in Toaster Paint. So this is all the Toaster Paint graphic that we used as the background in Lightwave. Okay, let's start by talking about the morph. All right, let's start by clearing out the scene, and let's load up our objects. Now you'll notice we have two versions here, News 4 Italic and News 4 Normal. And let me show you how we created those before we even load them up. We went into Modeler, and I had the News 4 Normal object. It's a simple text object here, and you can see it's got a little bit of depth, hitting the A key to fit it into all three views here. There we go. Okay. And I used for Modify the Shear tool. And by grabbing along the top here, I can create an italicized version. I just drag it over a little bit. And then I just did a save, and I saved this as News 4 Italic. Now there's one thing that I did not do here, and I'm pointing this out and really stressing it because it can mess you up and will make your morphs not work at all. So be very careful of this. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't start out with the normal version, and then, for instance, copy or cut this, go to another layer and paste it in. And there's a reason I didn't do that. As soon as you cut or copy between layers with an object, it changes what's called the point list of the object, and the object will no longer morph properly. If you've ever had a morph where the object just completely disintegrates in the middle of the morph and does something just weird, it just looks like the object's gone insane, then you've probably been cutting and pasting between layers in Modeler. So the solution, don't do that. And all we do is we just keep it in the same layer. I have this version, the normal version, in one layer. I go do the shear in exactly the same layer. I don't copy or paste anywhere between layers. So again, this is something to watch out for. All right, let's exit out of here now. All right, let's load up those objects. I'm hitting load object twice, italic, and normal. And let's select normal italic first. What we're going to do is we're going to select the metamorph target for italic as normal. And we're going to metamorph it using an envelope. Now again, just like we did in the dissolve, I don't really want the envelope to start right at the beginning. In other words, I don't want it to move on and be morphing the entire scene. So I'm going to make this, again, a 90 frame scene. And I'm going to have it start for the first 60 frames, just stay italicized. Then in the last 30 frames, I want it to slowly morph to normal. So we just create keyframes the same way as we did for dissolve. We'll create a keyframe at 60. We'll create a keyframe at 90. Then 60, we want it 0. 0, we want it 0. 90, we want 100% morph. Okay, so from 60 to 90, it slowly morphs. And then, of course, at 60, we turn on linear to get rid of that curve. All right, this will work. And if we go in, let's set our scene to 90 frames and go into layout. Here's the italicized version. And you're going to see what happens when we render this is that it's going to slowly morph. There's only one problem, and you can see it throughout as it's generating this preview. We can still see the other object. This is not effective. So what we need is, we need a way of getting rid of the normal version so it's not visible. There's two methods. Let me just stop it from making a preview here. Method number one would be to take the object and just sort of move it beyond the camera. It's out of the way now, and just keyframe it there, and it won't bother anybody. So there's one method, just move it out of camera distance. The probably better way to do it, because there's ways to mess that up, for instance, if you move the camera. The better way to do it, gives you more flexibility, is just to select the News 4 normal object, whatever your morph target is, and dissolve it out 100%. So now, it's there, but it's not visible. Again, it's being selected. So again, we're using dissolve here because it comes in handy for our morph here. And this will work perfectly. There's going to be no problems whatsoever with this. So we're going to leave that dissolved out. Okay? Now, what we did then was, we'll select the italic object. And let me start by dropping it down on the y-axis and moving it over. So we'll start it just out of camera view at frame 0. And the one thing we had to do that I'm not going to do here is we had to actually, don't forget, set it up so it would be right on top of that bar. And that was just a matter of setting it up in the right position and doing some super low res renders so it would render very, very quickly. So the first idea is we'll just move it to here for right now. Load up the image that we want to use. And with that image loaded, we just go to backdrop as we've done before and set bridge big, which was the toaster paint with the bridge on it as our background. And camera, super low res, let's just do a render here. And we look at the screen as it renders out. Okay, that's a little high and not quite on the line. And you see one of the advantages now of an 040 board, by the way. This is, again, the GBP GeForce 040 I'm using in this machine. And one of the good things about it is it's quick for doing things like this. The actual speed of rendering frames usually doesn't affect me too much because I render them overnight. But on quick little things like this where I'm trying to test something, that's where render speed's really important. So F10 to render, and let's see how this works. All right, that's better. I probably just want it a little bit smaller, so I'll move it back, down, and one more. Okay, we'll go with that. That's set up pretty well. Now let's head back into layout, and again, I'm going to turn off everything but X because I'm very happy with my Y and Z positions and I don't want to affect them. So here at 0, keyframe, let's go to frame 90. Right there at frame 90, let's say. You'll notice, by the way, it's not morphed. It shows us the unmorphed version. We're at frame 90. And what I'm going to do here is turn on spline controls, and again, tension of 1, just in the last frame. What this is going to do is it's going to start quickly and then slow down as it approaches the end frame there. It's going to look very, very nice. All right, let's just go over the idea behind morphs one more time to make sure it's clear in your mind. You start with an object, and then you take a variant of the object. Remember, with morphs, you cannot use just any two objects. So, for instance, we took a logo, we italicized it by using the shear function, and again, so it's a variant of the same object. Then we loaded both of those, the normal version and the sheared version. Then what we do is we set one as the morph target and set up an envelope. We dissolve out the one that we're morphing to so it's not visible on screen. And to do that, we just set a simple 100% dissolve up. And then that's all there is to morphing. It's very simple. Now, morphing is useful for things like this, but for a lot of things, you don't want to get carried away. For instance, sometimes there's functions that you can do just as easily by stretching or resizing as you can with a morph. So again, don't make more work for yourself. If you can do something easier with a move, rotate, size, or stretch, just do it that way. And also understand that morphing does not let you pick any two objects. Again, you are limited to what you can do. It has to be a variant of the original object. All right, we're going to be doing a more complex morph a little bit later, but that gives you an idea of what we're doing. The next thing we want to cover here is the globes that get more transparent on the bottom of the screen and more opaque as they rise to the top. So let's load the globe object up. And it uses a surface called spheres. And you can see that there's 864 polygons with that. Let's just go in to Modeler for a moment here. And I want to show you what the globe object looks like. And we'll fit it in by using the A button. And there's a reason it's 3 spheres. It's one object, though. And remember, even though these aren't connected, it's considered one object. But the thing I want to show you here is the size, because this is going to be significant. Right now, each one of these grid squares is 2 meters. So we can see there's about a little over 2 meters. We have 1, 2, 3. There's 6 meters there. And probably with the extra from here, it's probably about 7 or 8 meters total. Let's call it 8. Well, actually, let's call it 7 because that looks a little more accurate. Okay. Now, the reason this is important is because what we're going to be using here is the same transparency trick that we talked about on the surfaces tape in this series. That's where we created a streak by using the grid procedural texture. And we're going to be doing something very similar here. And what we're going to do is, these objects, even though they're not connected, this will work out fine. We go to transparency. By the way, the rest of the surface is set. I've got it sort of you can see a gold texture, and I've got a little bit of reflection map, and I've got specular and diffuse set. The real trick here is with transparency. We're going to set up a texture, and it's 0 at one side, and we will go to grid and set the texture value to 100%. Now, remember the first part of the trick here is make sure texture size is 111, and we will set line thickness to 1. And that means that the lines are 100% of the thickness. 1.0 means 100% of the thickness of whatever your texture size is here. So remember, now what's happening is the texture value is completely overtaking the value that we set on the first requester. So what that means is that 0 is being completely overtaken by this texture value, 100%. And now the entire trick is to put our texture center up, and I'm going to set it negative 3.5 on Y. Why 3.5? Because I said it's about 7 meters tall. So that'll put it up top, and I will set that negative 3.5. All right, and now we're just going to give it a fall off. And all we need to do here is figure out if it's 8 meters that it's falling off total, about 7 meters total, and we want to fall off 100%, we just need to divide 100% into 7. And I'm just going to sort of kludge it here and guess around 12 or let me do about 13. This will work. I don't need to be completely exact here. And let's go into layout. And let's go to frame 0. Okay, you see where these spheres are. Let's just move them. Oops, wrong object. We'll just move the spheres here. I'm going to move them a little closer to us as well. and keyframe those at 0. And let's just do a quick little render here to see how this works. Alright, and you can see that works. Even in the super low-res version, you can see how it gets the bottom sphere is very transparent, whereas the top sphere is completely opaque, and the one in the middle is sort of transparent. And again, this is the same technique that we used to create a streak on the surfaces tape. Now there's one problem that we're going to have with this, and you're going to see that when we go into layout, and I'm going to bring the object up. I'm going to move it just on the y-axis. I'm going to make it so let me actually move it down so that this sphere is at the bottom. And render. What you're going to see here is this bottom sphere is not transparent, but it's fully opaque. And why is that? It's because the object itself is actually moving transparent to opaque. It's moving up, transparent to opaque. So when you move the object, the transparency stays with the object. Now this, by the way, is not what I would call a problem. It's just not the effect we want here. You might want this effect sometimes, and here's the way you do it. Now there's a trick that we can use to get around this, and it's just using world coordinates. Let's go to Transparency, Texture, and let's turn on the World Coords button here, World Coordinates. And now what this is going to do is this is going to, instead of making the texture center, -3.5, apply to the object, it's just going to apply to the world. So in other words, the center for this texture will be 3.5 meters below the surface of the world. And the fall off is going to apply the same way. Therefore, when we move our object through here, when it's at the bottom of the screen, it's going to start off as transparent. As it moves up, it's going to become more and more opaque. So let's just use that. And the only difference is turning on world coords and rendering that. And now you're going to see as it renders down, very transparent there. We enter layout and move the whole thing up. Re-render that. Again, you can see the sort of fading transparency still. And if we move it up even more, by this point, it's going to be opaque. And you'll see that here. There we go. So now the texture really doesn't just apply to the objects. It's not really, this is what world coordinates does. It keeps the texture from being applied to just the object. It applies it to the world, and it really lets the object move through that texture. And this is another very, very good use for that. And you'll see things like this all the time, these sort of elements. A couple of examples are you'll see sometimes globes or baseballs or footballs, an entire row. There's some paint boxes, high-end paint box systems that can do that sort of stuff easily. And again, it's very easy to do in Lightwave. And you'll see the baseballs as they move along from left to right get more transparent. This is the way you do it. You just set a fall off along your X coordinate instead of your Y. So you'd set along X and then fall it off along X. And you could do the same thing we did here with world coordinates. So as they move across the screen, they become transparent. They fade out slowly. So again, you've got a lot of options here, and one of the big keys is watch television and just rip them off mercilessly. Take a look what they do there, because believe me, anyone who creates graphics on TV is watching other people on TV and ripping them off mercilessly. So sort of follow along with the trend there. Okay, let's take a look at the final example one more time, and you can see what we've done there, and it's a pretty effective looking little graphic and very, very easy to set up. All right, let's take a look at one more example here, and this sort of will tie in a lot of the stuff that we've done already. And you'll see this graphic, the logo machine graphic. What we're doing here is a number of tricks. Now, one of the first things I want you to notice is that the letters have shadows on them. And this is very, very easy to do. Okay, so once again, the first thing we want to do here is load up an image. And I will load up paper. And we're going to use that in the background. And now let's load up our objects. And we've got a bunch of them here. You're going to see we've got a bunch of objects. Now, let's start with world famous. And you'll notice that we have two versions of World Famous. There's World Famous and World Famous Shadow. And if we go into Layout, it's going to look like we have one object. So we go to our different views, there's really only one object it looks like. But that's because the objects are exactly on top of each other. They are exactly right on top of each other. Let me move one out and you can see they're just the same object basically. So what's the difference between these two? The difference is that one of them has a surface name called Shadow and the other one doesn't. That's the only difference. And the whole trick here is that we can fake out shadows by putting a flat version of a logo or any other object that's 50% transparent behind the object, down and maybe to the left or right a little bit, or up and to the left and right. So that's the entire trick here. And again, so easy it's almost criminal, but it works. That's a lot faster than trying to generate shadows on your own. So here's the way that works. We have these two versions of the object. I'm going to set Shadow, first off, to be parented to World Famous. And the reason for that's pretty simple. Because shadows have a tendency to follow objects in the real world, so we want to do the same thing here. So now the shadow version will follow the regular object. So far, so good. And now all we need to do is, let's just reset this to the middle and zoom in. I'm using the period key to zoom in. We will take shadow, and I'm going to move it back a little bit. Let me go to the top view. So it's just a little behind. And now over and down. All right? And keyframe it. It's an important thing. Remember to keyframe it there. So now whenever we move World Famous around, its shadow follows. And let me just exit out to Layout for a moment here and show you the surfaces. World Famous, I'll talk about in a second. I'm doing a color gradient using the grid trick that we just showed you. And shadow color is 0, 0, 0. Shadows tend to be black. 50% transparency. You can change this anywhere from, 10 or 20% up to probably 80%. Any of those will work depending on how dark you want the shadows. I'll keep it at 50%. And that's the entire surface. Black, 100% diffuse, transparency 50%. World Famous, what I did was I wanted to create a color grade. The objects, the letters here are about 1 meter tall. And I try to make it a habit of creating objects. All my logos is 1 meter tall because there's no such thing. If you try to find a flying logo, try to go out and capture one to measure, you'll find that they don't really exist. Flying logos don't have any size because they're imaginary objects. So I make all my flying logos 1 meter tall just for the sake of consistency. And what I did was I set the interior surface color here to sort of one shade of blue. And I used a grid. Texture size 111, line thickness of 1. Texture color, darker shade. And then it's just a matter of setting texture center up, -0.5, and doing a 100%, actually I did 150%, so it would really fall off quickly, over the entire course of the letter. And we use that. And again, this is the same technique that we showed you in surfaces, a variant of the trick we just showed you on this tape. And take a look at the way this renders out. This is in medium res here. And you'll see that the letters change color. And also we have a nice, very effective little drop shadow there. Now again, medium res only took 16 seconds on this L40 based machine. And the thing to remember here is that this is the only way to do shadows. There's no way to cast shadows on this background object, the image, the paper image we have there, or any of the other background images that we've used throughout this tape, because they're not really objects. They're just pictures that are behind whatever you render. So they're not really there. We're faking out shadows, but this is better, faster, and more effective. So you really win in 3 ways here. This is the way to go for shadows on simple logo projects. Really cut your render times down. And so far, so good. So that's all the tricks there. And all we did was we just set up a simple move. I'll rotate it on bank. Kind of move it up here. Maybe a little bit closer. So we set it up top. Create a keyframe there. Let me get a little bit more out of view. I stopped myself from creating a keyframe because I could still see the logo. So there's one. And let me set that up there, and I will create a keyframe for there at about 50. And I try to avoid doing this. I should have gone to frame 50 first. Okay, and let's just see how that's sort of looking. I just want to make sure that that's coming across. Okay, that's moving. Okay, so there's part one where you're going to use that shadow on everything that we do here. You'll see, let's run the animation one more time here, and what you'll see is the shadows are on all the objects. So it's the same trick on all of them. We always load up two versions, a regular one and a shadow version. Okay, the next thing to notice here is the pretty darn good. It seems to be moving on a curved path. This, once again, very, very easy. Okay, the first part of it is let's go into Modeler, and we are going to load up the pretty darn cool object here. And you'll notice it's just a straight object the way you would expect it to be. But we can do this. Modify more, and we can use the bend tool. And I'm just grabbing it from the left view. It's like we're grabbing a handle over here and pulling it down a bit. And I want to make sure you notice it's sort of off kilter here or here. I want to keep it lined up on this black line. So release. There we go. Okay, now we've given the object a curve. Let's back off a little bit. I'm using the comma key to back up. And we will now take the object and move it. Remember, with no point selected, everything is selected, so we can move it up here. And remember, this, I'll just fit this in. So here's our object, bent, and it's moved off of these dark black lines, which are the pivot point. And this means when we rotate the object now, take a look how it rotates. Sort of looks like it's moving on a curved path. Once again, so easy, it's criminal. So we would just then save this as pretty darn good. This is the only trick there. So we bent it, put it off the pivot point, save it, and then when we load the object, see, there it is, and let's just select that. We'll move it towards us a little bit here. And let's just go to frame 0, move it towards us. Move it down a little bit. That'll work right there. And then just rotate it, and this is a bank rotation. And remember, we're going to want the object to hold from frame 0, let's say around frame 45, and then start moving. So we just set it where we want it, create a keyframe at 0, and create a keyframe. Let's go to frame 45. Same position, 45. And then let's just rotate it. So, I don't know, we'll put it there at around, let's say frame 75. Let's go to 75. 1 second later, it will have moved across screen. It's probably a little quick. But let me just show you how that will look. Let's just preview frames 45 to 75. First frame 45, last frame 75. Go back to layout, and then we'll just see those frames. And there we go. Again, it kind of looks like it's moving along the curved path, but it's just rotating around that center pivot point. Just a complete hack. And here's the way that looks. Now, one thing you'll notice is the cool kind of kicks up there at the end. It just kind of moves up a little too much there. So what I would do in that case is just, let's move it back here. At this frame, I might move it down a little bit on the Y rotation. On the Y axis, sorry. It's not rotating, I'm moving it. And let's see how this looks from camera. Okay. And let's just make a preview there. And now as it's moving across, I'm also moving it down. And again, this is just one of those trial and error things. That works pretty well for me. Again, just by moving it down, it's actually sort of bringing it, which keeps the end from looking like it's kicking up. And it looks something like this. Again, pretty handy. Okay, now the final part where the logo moves around, let's look at the animation again, where you see the words logo machine turning around. This was the trickiest part of this, but it uses a lot of things that we've seen already. So let's actually clear the whole scene out and set this up just on its own. We're going to start by loading in the objects. And what we have is, we have logo machine. We have logo machine shadow. Let's take this a step at a time. Okay, so the way we set that up was the way we've done that before, which is we select the shadow object, parent it to the main object, then move it back just on Z a little bit, not too much, just a little bit, and then down, and I'll move it to the right. Okay, so there's our shadow. Remember to keyframe it. So now where we remove logo machine, the shadow will follow. Okay, there's part one. Now what we did here was, and you have a couple of options, but I used a null object. I could have taken logo machine and moved it off of its axis, just like we did with the pretty darn cool object in Modeler last time, but I think it was easier to use a null object. Now let's talk about a null object for a second. A null object is a single point object, and it's not visible at all. It's just a placeholder, really. But watch what we can do with it. The null object is located outside of any drawers. It's just on its own with Toaster 2.0. And we can load that up and head back into layout. And now I'm going to parent logo machine to the null object. So wherever the null object moves, and the null object is just that little dot, right? You can see it right there. Wherever the null object moves, a logo will follow. But, and let's just reset everything here. If we take logo machine and move it a distance from the null object, that'll be good there. And keyframe it. It's now offset in that position. So the null object is here, but the logo is actually, see, there's the null object. The logo is actually positioned away from it. So far, so good. And the reason we moved it away from the object, away from the null object, is so we can move it and have it rotate. Because here's all we do to keyframe it. And this is very, very simple. First off, let's set this up as a 120 frame scene. So we start the null object, so we can't see the word logo machine at all. Now again, we're moving the null object here. We're not moving the logo. It's just following the null object because they're parented. We set this here at 0, keyframe. Then what we're going to want to do, it's a 120 frame move. So what we're going to do is we're going to split it up so the midway point is frame 60. I'm going to move it out here. Okay, this will be frame 60. Let's go there. Move it out. And now rotate it. And watch what happens when we rotate this around back. We're rotating the null object. Logo machine is offset, and so it's going to follow around. Remember, we're turning this part. When we turn this, this will follow. And watch what happens here. Bing. There we go. So at 60, we want it just straight up like this. All right, perfect, minus 90 degrees. We'll keep that there. Then, at frame 120, we want it upside down and back off screen. So that's frame 120. Okay, let's see how this looks so far. I'll just do a quick bounding box preview. You'll see one problem. It's starting immediately to do that rotation. So what we need to do is we need to have it not do that. We need to have it move out straight, then start the rotation. And that's actually pretty easy to do. We want it here at frame 60, so let's go to, say, frame 45. And let's just turn off the rotation. I'm going to do a reset here. You notice it shows us it's rotated, reset, all right, and keyframe. So that's there. And now let's go to frame 75. This was 15 frames before frame 60. Let's go to 15 frames after frame 60. And the same thing. We'll get rid of the rotation. This puts it up the wrong way. We actually want it 180. So we'll just set that manually and keyframe it. So let's look at what our keyframes are now. I'm going to move out so we can see it here a little easier. 0, 45, 60, 75, 120. All right, those are our positions. 0, 45, 60, 75, 120. This is almost going to be there. There's going to be one problem. And you'll see it when we make the rotation. See what it's doing there? It's kind of picking up, then it rolls over. That's not what we want. So what we need it to do is we need it to move in a straight line segment between 0 and 45. You can see the problem that we're having there. We need a straight line segment. Now, we could do that with a linear move, but I think the better way to do it is to use bias. Now remember what bias does with the spline controls. We discussed this in Lightwave Essentials, but what bias does is it puts all of the curve either before or after the keyframe. And in this case, we want all of the curve to come after the keyframe. So we will go to frame 45, and to put all of the curve after, we set a bias of +1. All right? Down here at frame 75, we want all of the curve before it. We want a straight line segment from here to here. So we set a bias of -1. Okay, and now watch the difference. Move straight, curves around, perfect. And again, that's just using bias. It works a little better than linear because linear would change the curve afterwards. It wouldn't make it as smooth a curve. This is a little bit better way to do it. And so this is how it looks from the camera view. Now you notice one thing, is it's not curving here. So, morph. We're going to morph this object. And the first thing we have to do is set up the morph target. And think about the way we'd like it. We'd like the object, if it's straight, to be bent over. Let's enter modeler. Let's clear out what we have here by doing a new. And let's just load up logo machine. All right. We're going to do a bend. And I'm going to not just grab it here. I could grab it. If you watch this lower left-hand corner, you can see how many degrees, but there's an easier way to do that, and then just by using numeric. And I want to bend it 180 degrees. Now this is 180 degrees. You can see that this is backwards. All right, so let's undo that and set it to -180 degrees. And you'll see that this will be correct. And let me just take this and sort of center the object up here. And you're going to see an immediate problem. Let me just save this out. Logo test. And show you the problem we're going to get into here with the morph. We'll load up logo test. And it seems like it should be pretty straightforward. We're going to dissolve out logo test 100% so we don't see it. Logo machine, we're going to do a metamorph. And think about what we want to do for the envelope here. Create a keyframe at 45, 60, and 75. All right? Because this is where we start our curve, then we're at full curve at 60. So what we're going to do is, from frame 0 to 45, 0%, no morph whatsoever. Frame 60, 100% morph. And then back to 75, 0% morph. To get rid of this curve, remember we go to frame 45, linear. Of course, we have to set up the metamorph target as logo machine, logo test here. So now we've set logo test as the morph target. And we should be all set to go. This seems like it should work. The envelope's set right, everything seems good, but when we go into layout and make a preview, we're going to get a real problem here. It's going to look pretty good, except watch here as it starts to move in. Problem number one, the shadow isn't morphing. But also, look what's happening to our object. Not exactly what we wanted there. And the entire problem here is that when we went into Modeler and bent the logo, it wasn't bent the right way. All we have to do is go into Modeler, and this is not right, because what's happening now is it's taking a flat object and trying to bend it around like this. That's not going to work. What it really wants to do is take the flat object, sort of pull up the middle, and in order to do that, we have to rotate this so the object is facing the right way. And I'm just going to get it exactly exactly 90 degrees. Just like this. This will work. And in fact, if we go to a different layer, let me show you what the morph target is. I called it Logo Machine Bent. And here it is. And again, that's the way it looks. And again, you can see it's almost now like we took it from the middle and bent it up. There's no way to actually do that. It's hard to do that with the bend tool. So what I do is I would bend it 180 degrees, then rotate it right. And if you're ever trying to rotate something and it's just not morphing properly, if you're trying to do a morph to a bent object, make sure your bent object has the right orientation. Otherwise, this will not work. All right, so that's what we did there. And let's just get rid of logo test. We'll clear that out. And we will load up bent. And that's what we want right there, Logo Machine Bent. Envelope is exactly the same. We're going to leave that where it is. And let's just take a look from frames 45. And our last frame is 75. And I'm just going to remember to take the bent version and 100% dissolve it out. And now let's take a look at how this previews. It's bending right around. Now again, you'll notice that the shadow isn't morphing. That's because the shadow has its own motion path. It's its own thing it's doing, so we have to set that separately. So how do we do that? Well, one thing that we could do is it would be pretty easy for us to go in and just load the shadow up, set the same thing, go through all this work again, but we're lazy. We do not want to do that, do we? So here's what we're going to do, and it's pretty straightforward. Let's go to the metamorph options for Logo Machine. Let's go to the envelope and see if we can save envelopes. So we'll save this, and you notice I've saved this already, and I call it Logo Machine Morph. Let me just resave this one. Okay, so here's the morph envelope. Now when we load up the shadow, again, we've got a bent version of the shadow. We tell the shadow, metamorph, envelope, exactly the same as the other one. We're going to load up Logo Machine Morph. See, there's the same envelope. We don't have to go through and recreate the keyframes. Tell it to morph to shadow bent. And then just tell shadow bent to dissolve out 100%. And here's the way this looks. Looks pretty much exactly the same. This just means that our shadow is going to morph properly. Now, one thing you're going to want to do here on the shadow is that when it moves around is on the bottom, unless your light had turned upside down, the shadow is now facing the wrong way. So one thing that I did here was, let's go to frame 60. At frame 60, I want the shadow. I don't want it straight here. I'm going to put it sort of straight. Let me just set it up here. And down a little bit more. Move it this way. And now we'll set it so it's up a little bit. So now the shadow's at this point falling straight down, which is a little more realistic for the way the lighting would be. Create a keyframe for the shadow there. And then at frame 75, I want the shadow down below the object. So, should be more like that. Probably also want it still over to the right. So this is just something to make the shadows fall a little more realistically. And again, you'll see now that the shadow is going to actually move a little bit as it does the morph and twist around to follow the other way. You can also use this technique, for instance, if you're moving an object just straight across the screen, but you want the shadow to move behind it. Start it over and to the right, for instance, and then as it slowly moves across, move it down and to the left. You can also move the shadows closer and further away and fake out like an object is moving closer or further to the surface behind it, to the image behind it. So you got a few options here with shadows. Now let's take a look at the animation one more time. You'll notice the next thing that's happening here is we have the object actually dissolves. It starts out as the normal logo, and then it morphs into the 3D version. Well, same thing. What we did was we loaded up 3D and 3D bent. Now, 3D bent, don't forget, is the morph target, so we want that, the wrong button there, 100% dissolved out. We dissolve out 3D bent. We want 3D to do a metamorph, so we go in, load envelope. It's a lot easier than entering those figures again. And we want to morph to bent. There it is, okay. Logo Machine 3D bent. Now, this will work, but the only problem is going to be we're going to be able to see all the objects. So the whole trick here was just to set up a crossfade dissolve so that the letters, the flat version, Logo Machine, would dissolve into the extruded version with a bevel on the front. Now, again, we did a dissolve here instead of a morph because the objects do not have the same number of polygons. Remember, we can't morph a perfectly flat version into a beveled version, and the dissolve was a little bit easier to do. So the entire trick here is just setting up the dissolve envelopes properly. We really have two things that are dissolving. The shadow is not going to dissolve at all, but Logo Machine will. So we're going to have that from, let's say, we're going to create a key at, I'm going to start the dissolve at around frame 50 and have it fully dissolved out by frame 70. So this means from frame 0 to 50, the Logo Machine flat object is fully visible. It's not dissolved at all. It's 0% dissolve. At frame 70, it's 100% dissolved. And again, let's just get rid of that curve. All right, now we'll use that. And the whole key here is Logo Machine 3D as just the opposite. Create at 50 and 70. Oops, there we go. But at frame 0, it's 100%. You can't see it at all. 50, 100%. You can't see it at all. And at 70, it's 0%, which is, it defaults to the 0% setting, so we're set there. Let's use that envelope. And now what you're going to see here is when we go into layout, the only problem is the 3D parts are right here in the middle. So in other words, take a look here as we make this preview. The only problem is the 3D now needs to be set up so it's parented to the null object and has the same motion path and everything. Otherwise, as you can see as it's making the preview, it's just sitting here right in the middle. It doesn't know to move with it. So we'll just set it up. We'll tell Machine 3D to be parented to null object. All right? Then the only other thing we need to do is to make sure that it's offset the same amount from the null object as the flat version is. So Logo Machine, its Y position is 2.45. We'll make Logo Machine 3D Y position. We want to do this at frame 0 because it's there throughout the entire scene. let's just enter it numerically, 2.45. And just make a keyframe. Now remember, all we're doing here is just setting up the same motion path, but it's going to be invisible for the first 50 frames. Then we're going to have that cross dissolve. It'll take 20 frames total from 50 to 70, and one is going to dissolve into the other one. And that's really the entire trick here, but it's pretty effective. This exact thing I mainly did because it takes into account a lot of stuff that we've done already, but you can start to see some of the possibilities. For instance, you could get text moving along a real curvy line by having one version that's morphed up, one version that's morphed down, and then as it moves up to down, you just do that morph, send it along a path, and it would look sort of like it's a fish going upstream or something like that. There's some very, very, very handy options here, and this is, again, the good use for morphing, and it also takes into account a little bit of a dissolve, which we worked on earlier in the tape. There's one thing that I didn't show you here that was a problem, and let me just talk about that for a second because it's something that you might run into. When I was doing my initial test renders, remember I showed you at the beginning of the tape how I will always render a few frames to make sure it looks good. I could see that the L was just vanishing at some point. It was just going away. And the reason was because it was going into the bend, and sometimes when you do a morph, when you try to bend a single polygon object, it's not made right, it's going to just disappear. And so what I did was I went into Modeler, and let's just take a look at the L here. It was originally one polygon. You'll notice it's split up into a bunch of triangular polygons. And that's just using a function called triple. And let me just show you how that works. If you ever have this problem where when you're rendering, parts of the letter just seem to vanish, just run a triple on it and see if that fixes your problem. We'll just select this polygon here, the O, go to the polygon menu, and triple. And you see how it splits it up into a whole bunch of these triangular polygons. All right, finally, let's talk about Axiom Software's Pixel 3D. Now, this is a third-party product, and it's one of the few third-party products that we actually talk about on these tapes, and the reason's pretty simple. It's a good product that will make your life easier, and there's no way to do what Pixel does within the toaster, and there's no planned thing that will do what Pixel does. And so what does Pixel do? What Pixel does is it takes bitmaps, it takes artwork, and something like this, just a piece of paper with a logo on it your client might give you, it lets you start with this and end up with a 3D logo. Now, it does not do it with no work. This is not a magic wand, it's a tool, and what we'll do is we'll greatly reduce the drudgery and the horrible part of the job, but it's not going to get rid of the work entirely. So that's important to bear in mind. So there's two ways we can start when we get artwork like this. And by the way, try to get artwork like this. And by like this, I mean it's pretty straightforward. And this is a two-color, this is a simple version of the logo. I only have two colors. One thing is I can always, let's say the stripes here were red and blue. Well, I can always change that in the modeler. So if at all possible, I would try to get pretty much a black and white version of the logo art, unless the colors are absolutely crucial that you need to have them right there. And generally it's not. Generally you can set the color later when you're in Lightwave. Now, also you notice this is fairly big. If someone comes in with a business card, you're going to be in trouble, particularly if you try to grab it with the camera. Trick one here is we have to get this into the computer. And we have two ways of doing that. First, we can use the toaster's frame grabber, set up the shot, grab this with the frame grabber, and then do some work on it and get that into Pixel. The second thing we can use is we can use a scanner, and there's basically a couple of different scanners out there for the Amiga, like the Sharp JX100 or the Epson ES300C. These are both color scanners, which is handy if you're doing image maps, but also they're very, very good for doing work like this, because this logo right here, you'll see something this big I can turn into a huge graphic. And the bigger the graphic, the easier a time Pixel will have converting it. So those are your two methods. And we're going to start by showing you frame grabbing, then we'll talk. The thing we're going to work with finally is a scan, because I really do think that a scanner will just make this whole process a lot easier. So let's start at the beginning. Let's just go to a frame grab. We'll exit out to switcher. And then we're going to select, we have our camera on input 1. We're going to select the program and preview as input 1. So now it's just a matter of grabbing the frame, and to do that we want to make sure that the freeze button right here on the interface is no longer pushed in. So you see it's not pushed in right now. As soon as we click on freeze, it's frozen the frame and put it into DV1 here in preview. If this is pushed in, just turn it off, then turn it back on. And here is the frame grab frozen version. All right, now we've got the picture grabbed. This is the easy part. Now what we need to do is we need to get this picture into a form that Pixel 3D can read it in. And there's two problems with this image right now. First off, it's 16 million colors, and even though it looks like it's only black and white, when the toaster grabs things, it grabs it using 16 million colors, 24-bit planes of information in computer terms. And this is way too much information for Pixel 3D to read. So we need to convert this down to fewer colors. Now, that's part A. Problem B is, how do we do that? There's no way to do that from within the toaster. So we need to take this frame outside of the toaster to convert it, and to do that, we need to save it in some form other than just a toaster frame store. Most programs that are image processors, like Art Department Professional or Image Effects from GVP, either one of those programs, can generally not read toaster frames. Now, both of those programs say that they'll have the ability to do that soon, but as of this tape, they don't have that ability. So we need to save this in a form that we can read it into either one of those programs. And let's see how we do that. What I would do here is, we can see that the frame is in DV1, and we are now going to enter Paint. Just turn it on, go inside, and from the right mouse button pull-down menu here, again holding down the right mouse button, on the far right-hand side under Prefs, we have Grab from DV1. So this will grab whatever is currently shown in DV1. We have two options here, 1 or 4. This means 1 field or 4 fields. And so we want to select 4 fields because there's no motion in this frame. If there were any motion in this frame, you'd want to use 1 field to remove it. You'd want to select 1 instead of 4. But that degrades image quality, and aside from that, if there's any motion in the frame when you're grabbing a still piece of artwork, you're doing something wrong. So what you want to do is re-grab it so there's no motion. You're either jiggling the tripod or there's an earthquake or something like that, and you probably want to re-grab again. So we just grabbed this with four fields, so we preserve all the image quality. You can see it comes in, and here it is in Toaster Paint. And one thing that you'll notice is that there is a sort of slight color variance in the levels of white here. And it's not just purely 2 colors. And part of the reason for this is just lighting. Now, we have a pretty good lighting setup here. It's nice and even. And again, using a copy stand like this is handy. I don't do that. This is a set. This is not what I have at home. At home, I tape stuff to the wall, and I have my Canon A1 little camcorder that I put on a table, and I grab stuff using that. So that's what I use at home. And the problem there is lighting. You need nice, even lighting. Otherwise, the shadows, you'll get a frame that goes from light to dark. That's going to cause a lot of problems when you're grabbing the logo too. Okay, but now that we have this, let's save this out. Again, right mouse button, pull down menu, save RGB. And what this is going to do is this is going to save something that we can use with, when it says save RGB, basically what it really means is it means save, let me just name this Bootronics. It means save IFF. And IFF is an Amiga file format that's readable by other programs. So, this is saved. I'm now going to quit the program, and I'm going to quit this to save memory. Now we are back at the toaster switcher. And let's go to the Amiga Workbench screen. To do this, we use a keyboard equivalent, which is Control, Control, Alt, Alt. And that's hitting the Control key on the left side of the keyboard twice, then the Alt key twice. So, Control, Control, Alt, Alt. And that brings us out to the switcher screen. Okay, from here I'm going to enter a program called Image Effects. And again, you could do the same thing with Art Department Pro, essentially, but now go into Image Effects. And this is an image processing program. Let me do a load here. And here's the frame that we just grabbed. And it's loading it up. And this sort of gives us a preview here. Let's go to the render screen, and I'm going to reduce the number of colors here. Let me reduce this to about 4 colors. So I'll try it at 4 first, then we'll go try it at 2. You notice I'm also in high-res laced. So what you'd want to do here, even if you're using something like Art Department Pro, is reduce it to a high-res interlaced version, that means you've got a lot of pixels, and reduce it to either 2 or 4 colors. So let's render here from Image Effects. There we go, that looks pretty good. Let me try it one more time. Let me try doing it to 2 colors. Okay. And now I'm going to use the toolbox function here to do a negative image. There we go. And I might even want to do a crop here, where I just crop out just what I need. This is another thing that will save us a little bit of time later. So we're just going to crop out just what we need here. And crop that. Okay, and let's just resave this. One other step that you might want to do here is, if the logo is really messy, you might want to go in and clean up the logo in a program like Deluxe Paint. Deluxe Paint's a very, very good paint program, and it's useful for this because it lets you operate on a real pixel-by-pixel basis. It lets you really get in there. So you might want to use Deluxe Paint to clean it up. In this case, I don't really think we need to. Now let's take a look at the difference. This is the frame-grabbed image, and you can see how big it is. Again, it's less than screen size, which makes sense since it's a frame grab. Now this is a scanned image. I'm just moving around, and this was scanned. It's the logo that you saw on the piece of paper there, and I scanned it at 300 dots per inch. And you'll notice it's bigger. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the difference between a scanned version in pixel and a frame grabbed version. So you can see it's just much, much bigger, working with a much, much bigger area. Okay, let's go into Pixel 3D Professional. And here we are in the program. Now, let's start with just one of the simplest things you can do, just creating regular text objects. And the way we do that is we click on the text button, we type in whatever we want, and then we load a font. And these are Amiga bitmap fonts. And you want to use the biggest font you possibly can. For instance, here's a 94 scan line tall font. I'll accept that. You see how it comes in. It's pretty smooth. Well, especially look at the round parts here, like the E. Let me just load in another version. And I'm going to use a 24 scan line tall font. And you see the difference there. It doesn't look nearly as good, and it's never going to look as good. And the reason for that is pretty simple. The bigger the input you give Pixel, and the more pixels there are in it, the better time Pixel will have of making a nice, smooth 3D version of it. If you've got a very small font or a very small frame grab or scan, there's nothing Pixel can do with that because it's only working with the information that you give it, and the information that you give it is kind of crude. So the larger the image that you feed Pixel, the better. And these bitmap fonts, again, you want something generally close to 100 scan lines tall or larger. That's using the text function. Using load, let's take a look and let's just find our toaster drawer again. 3D images. All right, so select the new version, the cropped and negative version. And you see this comes in with no problems. So we fix that. Now we have different view modes here, just like we do in the toaster, front, top, side, and perspective, that we can actually move around. You see that came in fairly quickly. Right now we're going to load in the scanned version. Again, one of the advantages of the scanned version is we don't have to really go through and do that much cleanup. When you scan something that's black and white, it's either white or black, period, because the scanner provides its own lighting. So we're going to load that up, and this is a bigger object, which means it's going to come in with more points along the surface here. And let's just go to the front view so we can see that. And again, this is because there's so many points on it. Now, first thing we're going to want to do here, smoothing. And what this is going to do is this is going to greatly reduce the number of points. You see, for instance, on the B, this line, we don't need that many points. It's just a straight line. And in smoothing, luckily we have these automatic settings, small, medium, and large. I generally would start with large on something like this, particularly a scanned image. You can always undo it. There is an undo key right here. Keyboard equivalent is U for that, and this will fix things. But you'll see the difference between this version and the smooth version pretty much immediately. Now you'll notice it keeps a lot of points around the curves, which is pretty much where you'd want them. We can do smoothing on a selective basis as well. If we go down here to pick, we can now drag a box. I'm going to hold down the right mouse button. We can drag a box around these points. You notice they become selected. And then we can run smoothing. Let's just make our smoothing percentage something higher, like 150%. Change selected only. And didn't seem to have it cleaned up a few points there, it looks like. Let's make it even higher. 200%. You see it's slowly removing a few of the points. We can also go in and edit points on a point-by-point basis. Unall, by the way, clears everything off. And let's just zoom in and over. Won't redraw until we click on redraw here or hit return. And again, if we want to, we could actually go in, pick just these points here, and do something like cut them out, for instance. We have cut, copy, and paste functions. And I'm just going to use X, which is the keyboard equivalent for cut. It's the same as clicking on delete, basically. So you can delete those. Don't like a point there, you can delete it. In some ways, this is a little easier and quicker than it can be in Modeler. Plus, you're right here already, so there's really no harm in just getting the work out of the way. Now, once you're happy, and this is where the work comes in, by the way. This is the boring part we're not going to show you, because this is just work. It's going in and cleaning up the points. The more time you spend on this, the better and more usable your object will be. You can fly up to any point in the object with no problems. So let's just keep this for now. And I'm going to use the A keyboard equivalent, which is the keyboard equivalent for auto fit. And you can also do extruding from within the program. Let's just clear everything out. And extrude. We can set different colors for our front and side faces, also for our back. And I usually set different colors for the front and side faces, so we can do what I was talking about before. Have it, for instance, like a matte blue on the front, silver on the sides. And the colors here don't make any difference, really. I'm going to select blue on the front, green on the sides. This is just, I use very radically different colors because I want these to be distinct. Then when we take this into Lightwave, we just take the green surface and change it to silver or whatever we want to use. So the colors here don't make any difference. They just set it up as different surfaces. And let's give it an extrude value of around, I don't know, 40. This is a fairly big object, so that will give it some depth. And then if we hit the space bar, watch this section down here. This will give us different views. We have to be in perspective mode. So you notice here's wireframe, hit space bar. Now it's a shaded colored version. And I'm just moving it around with the mouse here. Click on redraw. And it actually shows it to us in color. Hit the space bar again. And this is a wireframe view where we can see the actual points. So this sort of toggles you through some useful settings here. And shaded color is handy so you can see, okay, the object looks pretty good. So that's pretty much it for Pixel. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. The one other thing I like to do sometimes is add a bevel. And again, that's easy. You just click on bevel, set the inset. I'll give it around 6 for inset and height. Then decide whether you want to bevel the front or the back of the object. I'll do just the front faces. Okay, let's redraw that. So you can see a little bit of a beveled edge there. The other thing that we can do is we can use the router bit bevel, and the router bit's pretty handy. Let me undo what we did there. Select router bit, then you load a bit. And there's a curved bit that comes with the program. And what this will do is it will give a nice curved bevel to the whole thing. But again, I would not run this until after I'd gone through, done my smoothing, and then removed any points that I want. And here comes the router bit one. And you can see it adds a lot more points and faces. But this whole process, again, even though it's work, is much, much quicker than if you tried to draw this logo on your own. All right, and now we can save the object. To do that, obviously, we just click on the Save button, choose Lightwave 3D as our output format, and then just save it to the appropriate drawer. In this case, Objects. And I'll just change the name to butronics.lwob, which is for Lightwave object. And then this is something that we can then use in Lightwave directly. Now, Pixel has a few other functions. It will load in other formats. So, for instance, if someone has an object in Imagine format or Aladdin or any of those formats, you can load those up and then use them in Lightwave. That's very handy because a lot of people out there have different objects that are public domain and that you can use. So, this is almost done saving here. And we can use Control-Alt-Alt to go back to the switcher. If you run out of memory at any point, Pixel will sometimes bring up an out-of-memory error. You might need to actually quit the entire toaster and then restart the toaster to go back in. Let's just head into Lightwave here, and let's load up the object. There it is. And you see with the beveled router bit on it, makes it a pretty big object, but that's okay. It'll look pretty cool. Head into Layout. Go to our camera view and rotate the object a bit, move it in frame, keyframe it, and let's just do a quick render here. Zenith color only for a one color backdrop. I'll do it in low resolution. And let's just change, you see our color, our surface here, there's green and white and then blue. So blue is the front faces and the bevel, green is the edges. And let's just load a surface up. Let's load up the silver surface. Pretty much comes with the toaster. And let's just do a quick render here, just to get an idea of how the logo looks. And again, changing surfaces, that sort of thing, is the kind of thing you might want to do in Modeler. You might want to do what we did before, which is make the very front faces one surface so you can not smooth them, then make the bevels another face so you can smooth it. But there's our logo, and again, quick and dirty. We just have a low-res version here, but it looks pretty much like the logo, and again, a lot less work than if we tried to draw the logo by hand. That's all for this tape. We hope you have enough stuff to give you something to work on for a while. And again, the way to think of these isn't as hard and fast rules, but these are just techniques. You can use these any way you want to. And again, hopefully also you see the way the process works for Pixel. The more time you spend, especially in cleaning up the image, the better your final output will be. And remember, if it's more work, charge more. That's the sort of key there. All right, if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to write us on the number that you see on your screen right now. And as always, I'm Lee Stranahan. Thanks a lot. We will see you next time. Bye.